Thor Love and Thunder rolls into the box office this weekend, and it's looking like it's going to struggle to meet even its lower end projections of a 300 million global open. We're going to talk about some of those numbers as well as Lightyear. A bit of a surprise and not a surprise at the same time at how many theaters have cut this film from their locations after very poor performance. And of course, Top Gun Maverick still out there doing its thing. We're going to talk about all of this, including some of that production budget kerfuffle back and forth on what did Thor Love and Thunder actually cost. And believe it or not, I found some information that might answer that question because it all goes back to Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Stay tuned. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there as always. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Like buttons always work pretty well, too. So we're going to be talking about the weekend box office. We have the weekend estimates now for Thor Love and Thunder, along with the other slate of films that are still at the box office, including Minions, including Lightyear, including Top Gun Maverick, Jurassic World. We're going to talk about some of these, how they're doing, but Thor Love and Thunder, of course, being the new one this week, is the one we kind of want to focus on. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the whole chart. So here we have the estimates so far this weekend from the numbers. Thor Love and Thunder coming in with a 143 million estimated domestic take. Minions Rise of Gru holds in fairly strong at 57%, down from last weekend at 45.5 million. Top Gun Maverick turns in another spectacular performance for a seventh weekend here at 15.5 million. Elvis at 11, Jurassic World Dominion at 8.4, The Black Phone at 7.6, and Lightyear coming into its fourth weekend with a paltry 2.9 million. And we're going to talk about Lightyear in particular here. So let's click over to that real quick. We'll work our way up this list because the first thing here we need to talk about with Lightyear is the radical change in box office locations this week, theatrical locations. If we go down here and we find our box office returns, you will see that something happened this weekend, something rather drastic. You can see where Lightyear started out with 4,200 theatrical locations in North America. By the time it got to its third weekend, it had a small drop-off to 3,800, fairly routine. However, look at the fourth weekend numbers here. Let's bring this up on the screen, and you can see that the number of locations was absolutely slashed to smithereens by about 1,800 spots, going from 3,800 locations on Thursday to 2,000 locations coming into this weekend beginning on Friday. And I want you to look at the column just to the right of those number of locations, and that figure, that dollar figure, is the per location average take, the average box office. So you can see why theaters were apt to cut this film so drastically. As the week started on July 4th, it was only pulling in about $300 per theater, down to $200 per theater by Thursday, and then that was all she wrote. Theaters had to make room for new films, but if you have a film that continues to perform, those locations will still hold the film in at least one of their screens. And all this says is that theaters are done with this film. They have decided to get rid of this, to really start powering it down because it is just taking up valuable exhibition real estate space at this point, and it's doing absolutely nothing. And to be clear, Lightyear has finally managed to cross a $200 million global gross in this case. And I think it's got little to nothing left in the tank. I think if it makes it to 225 at this point, it would be somewhat of a miracle. I think 250 at this point is almost completely off the table. Disney should be putting this onto Disney Plus relatively soon at the 45-day mark. It also wouldn't surprise me if they go ahead and drop it at the 30-day mark. This has been a complete bungle for the Walt Disney Company on a feature animated film from Pixar Studios based on the biggest franchise, Toy Story, that they have ever had. And what a disappointment this is. If these numbers hold and continue to where I think they will wind up, again, Disney is going to lose somewhere north of $150 million on this picture. Now back to the master list here for the weekend returns. You can look at Top Gun Maverick. 15.5 million, another 40% drop from the previous weekend, which is incredibly good, especially again at its 7th weekend, just about to break $600 million domestically. That should occur on Monday or Tuesday of this coming week. But look at the number of theaters. In its 7th weekend, it still is in 3,500 plus locations. 3,500. The movie started out with around 4,500. It's only lost about 1,000 locations, which is nothing for a movie that's in its 7th week. That just goes to show you how strong the hold is and how much theaters desire keeping this movie around as compared to Lightyear, who's coming into only its 4th weekend, that has lost more than half of its screens at this point from where it opened. Jurassic World Dominion still hanging in there. 3,200 screens, less than Top Gun Maverick at 8.4 million, a little more than half of Top Gun Maverick's performance, rounding out its total domestic gross at this point to $350 million. Elvis still performing well, being a much smaller budgeted film, and Minions: The Rise of Gru, which I did get a chance to see this weekend, really enjoyed it. 45 million on its 2nd weekend with a 57% drop, bringing its total domestic gross to 210 million. This is a movie that, like many of these kids' movies are supposed to be, it generates not only box office, but it generates a ton of merchandising. Minions: The Rise of Gru is sitting on a $6 billion gross sales of merchandising since the franchise began with Despicable Me. So, Universal Studios is very happy with this. This is kind of one of those films where, hey, if it just breaks even at the theater, it's going to sell another $500,000 or $500 million worth of toys while it's running. And those licenses that companies like Walt Disney or Universal in this case, or Paramount for some of their bigger projects, when they license this kind of stuff out to companies like Hasbro and Mattel, they're making a lot of money on that backside. The thing in the case with Lightyear, though, being kind of just the opposite, Disney would have had a similar deal. However, I'm sure Hasbro and Mattel, who's ever producing those toys for that franchise at this point, are none too happy with the performance of the film, because that does translate into very poor sales of the toys, and there's money lost on that end as well. So let's move on to Thor Love and Thunder. Now, you've heard me talk on this channel now for some time that I felt like the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in trouble in terms of its long-range box office performance. I felt like, especially after last summer with Black Widow, Shang-Chi, The Eternals, it showed some very dire signs of weakness in the franchise. And when you're spending $200 million on average per production, that can become a big problem, because along with the production budgets like that of $200 million, and spending at least $100 million, if not $150 or more, on marketing a film like this to put it in theaters, you get some very high hurdles that you have to cross. As a reminder to everybody out there, films like this generally walk home with about 55% of the domestic box office grosses. They walk home with about 43% of the international grosses, excluding China, where they take home a far smaller percentage of between 20 and 25%. So a movie like Thor Love and Thunder, if the budget is indeed what is being reported at $250, and we're going to talk about my thoughts on some of that, that means that they really spent at least another $150 million on marketing this film. To give you a good idea, Spider-Man No Way Home, we know from reporting on Deadline magazine that the P&A, the global prints and ads or marketing spend on Spider-Man No Way Home, was north of $240 million. Doctor Strange easily would have come in with $150 million more for that movie. We just saw Top Gun Maverick, where we had from inside sources at Paramount itself that the ad spend was north of $150 million for Top Gun Maverick. So to think that they only would have spent 100 to 125 or something like that million on Thor Love and Thunder would be a folly idea. This is a big project for Disney. They need the returns, and in order to drive audiences in, you've got to spend the money to advertise it, especially when you're in so many different countries like these big blockbuster movies often are. So the all-in cost for Thor Love and Thunder is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million. If we use that 55 and 43% rule and no China release again for Thor Love and Thunder, we're looking at a film that needs to clear around $800 million at the box office to make that happen. But was the budget for Thor Love and Thunder really $250 million? or as some other sources have suggested, somewhere around 180 to 200 million. I'd believe that a little bit more because that seems to be the standard fare for Marvel films. Now, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness had a listed $200 million budget. I presume that they had blown that budget because the budget is just the initial budget. That's not necessarily what they spent. We know for a fact that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, as a reminder to folks out there, had about 6 weeks, 6 solid weeks of big-time reshoots, not the normal pickup shoots and corrective shoots for fixing things in principal photography like most films do. This was a big reshoot project, and it certainly added probably many, many millions more, if not tens of millions more, to that budget. We don't know of any such big reshoots with Thor Love and Thunder, at least that I'm aware of. So the $200 million frame for that budget seems more reasonable. So how did we get to the 250? Well, let's go to an article from Variety magazine from about 3 years ago, and I think it gives us a hint of what might be going on. From July 25th, 2019, Variety magazine. Marvel's Thor Love and Thunder and Shang-Chi to shoot in Sydney, Australia. Now, what this article goes into is some details that the two movies would be filming together, back to back. And the reason they did this was because if some of you remember when we talked about Shang-Chi when it came out back in September of last year, there was some talk that a film tax credit from the government of Australia brought the cost down. And at first, the reported budget on Shang-Chi was around $200 million. Then it kind of got revised by some sources down closer to $150 million. And I thought to myself, well, a $50 million tax credit would be a heck of a tax credit for a film like that. And something just didn't add up, but we went with it at the time. But let's read from the article. Thor Love and Thunder, the fourth part of Marvel's superhero franchise, will shoot in the Disney-owned Fox Studios in Sydney, Australia. The film is set to receive more than $16.7 million in subsidies from the Australian federal government and the New South Wales state government. Harwin also confirmed the previously announced but unnamed Marvel film that the state had also attracted to Sydney is indeed Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Shang-Chi will shoot first. Pre-production on Thor Love and Thunder will start in March of 2020, with filming to begin several months later in August. The Australian funding for the film is a combination of the Federal Location Incentive Grant and the states-made NSW Fund, which offers $38.2 million or 55 million Australian dollars. And I think that's where the $50 million film tax credit figure came from. The total bucket, not just what these productions got, and not in US dollars. Shooting Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and Thor back-to-back will provide local crews with sustained, continuous employment opportunities. So in other words, a lot of the allocated production budget costs for these two films that we're shooting back-to-back were probably coalesced by Disney in many regards, because more than likely what was happening with all of these local companies, these local production crews, they were signing one contract for these two films to get the rates down, to get the costs down. Because anytime that you can guarantee a longer length of service and more work, a lot of times that brings in economies of scale to get those costs to come down. The question then becomes, where does Disney allocate those costs? Because Disney could effectively take lesser costs in a movie like Shang-Chi that they think won't make as much money at the box office as, say, Thor Love and Thunder, where they can then amortize and shift more of that total production budget over to Thor. If we're talking about having a Shang-Chi budget that was $150, which was very low for a Marvel Cinematic Universe film, even at that time, and Thor Love and Thunder with $250, which is above average for an MCU film that isn't a big ensemble piece like Captain America Civil War or Avengers like Endgame or Infinity War, well, we're starting to make sense, because if you add those two together, they're each about $200 million. But like I said, if you're the Walt Disney Company and you want to be able to show a certain production that was profitable when you do your quarterly stock report, if you're able to shift some of those coalesced costs, those shared costs between these two movies from the lower returning film like Shang-Chi to what's expected to be a higher returning film, then you might be able to show profits on both films. And I think that's what's going on with Disney. Plus these tax incentives, these tax credits that they got, somewhere around 18 million, not the 50 million that was originally reported. That was the total bucket that Australia had available. So I think there was something lost in translation as some of these previous articles came out. And I think that kind of explains why we have the production budgets and the variance that we do between these two films. If anybody can explain to me that they thought Thor Love and Thunder had a significantly more, $50 million more worth of CGI production than, say, Doctor Strange, I didn't see it. So I think those movies both came in around the same price. It's just how Disney chose to allocate the dollars to which film. Now, to try to figure out where Thor Love and Thunder is going to wind up, we can look at certain things like Rotten Tomatoes and CinemaScore and Metacritic and stuff like this, and they will kind of give us a guidepost, since we have a recent example with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And curiously enough, the ratings here on Rotten Tomatoes actually look very similar to what we saw with Doctor Strange. If we click here into the critics' reviews, now standing at 68%, you see what happens here? 68% for all critics. But the top critics, and the top critics generally are the big review houses, right? We're talking about Variety Magazine, we're talking about the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Atlantic, all kind of stuff. The big magazines usually get that top critic tier. They're only at 51%, and that's not that much further lower than what we saw with Doctor Strange. And as we all know what happened with Doctor Strange, great big opening weekend, and then it hit a brick wall, and it barely crossed a 2.0 set of legs from opening weekend to where it is now. It pretty much flatlined. You never want to see that with a film. If a film is really good and gets great word of mouth and has a big opening weekend, it should carry. Spider-Man No Way Home opened with $260 million in North America alone and finished up at a 3.19 set of legs from that point. A tremendous win for Sony Pictures in that case, because it had amazing word of mouth and it was universally praised. We're not getting that with Thor Love and Thunder. So now, with that in mind, let's look at the box office open this weekend and figure out where this film is going to go. So as of right now, the estimates show Thor Love and Thunder with a $143 million take domestically, North America, that's US and Canada, with an international box office at $159 million. Again, I stress these are estimates, showing the weekend take at $302. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you've kind of seen me talking the last few days that the projections on Thor Love and Thunder have continuously come down further and further, and even into the weekend as the movie began to play. It went from Thor Love and Thunder looking at $300 million worldwide open to Thor Love and Thunder hoping to get to a $300 million worldwide open. And as of right now, it says 302, but again, that number could change very easily one way or the other between now and when the final figures come out, probably late Monday, if not into Tuesday, in a couple of days here. We may see that opening weekend drop to somewhere around 295 or 297. It may go up to 307. We just don't know, but it's certainly within the margin of error. And there's a problem with that either way. It really doesn't matter. Because if we go back here and we talk about this $250 million production budget, again, whether it really was 250 or if it was really 200 and they allocated and shifted some of the costs from Shang-Chi's shared production time in Australia over to Thor Love and Thunder, it really doesn't matter. But what we're looking at here again is about a $400 million easy all-in cost for this film when you add in the global marketing. If we presume at this point that Thor Love and Thunder, based on the critical reviews and the similarity in the pattern to what we got with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, if this film plays out globally at close to a 2 to a 2.25 set of legs, then this movie is going to struggle to get to $700 million. And I think if it makes it as high as a 2.5x set of legs, which would be about average for a non-ensemble like Avengers or Endgame or something like that, pretty average for a non-ensemble individual Marvel character picture like this is, that means that it's going to get to about $750 million. It may very well fall short of breaking even. And that sounds crazy as it is, but it's just the facts. And here's the other part of it too. Remember, The higher the amount of that total gross it comes from international markets, that means that break-even figure is going to continue to climb. Because if you're only getting 43% on average from your international markets versus 55% here in North America, the US and Canada, you want that domestic figure to be higher and higher. This is one of the reasons that Top Gun Maverick is such a bang-out hit. Again, according to inside sources, we talked about this a few weeks ago in a video called Tom Cruise's $50 million payday. Well, it's a lot higher than that now, I can guarantee you. That film, according to sources at Paramount that was reported by Matthew Bologna at Puck Magazine, Paramount's break-even figure on that film was $410 million. Now, the costs of production were nowhere close to what we have here, allegedly, with Thor Love and Thunder. They were about $172.5 million production, over $150 million on marketing spend. The other portion of that came from a first dollar deal with both Skydance, which was the production company that made the movie, and with Tom Cruise himself. They get gross points on what comes back from the theater to the distributor and before Paramount takes any of its cut. So that's why that cost raised up. Well, they have more than crossed the line of profitability on that. They only needed to reach about 800 some odd million to cross that mark. They're almost at 1.2 billion right now. Miles Teller already out there talking about making a Top Gun 3. That's a conversation for another time. Maybe we'll talk about it this afternoon on the live show. But again, there's a lot of moving parts to this. So there's really no necessarily one size fits all when it comes to how these movies perform and making their money back. Now, one thing I want to close out with this is that even though this kind of movie might not break even in the theaters, 5 or 6 years ago, that would have been okay as long as it recovered the vast majority of its costs, because it used to be for decades and decades that these movie studios, these distributors, would then license these things out to third parties. They would go to places like Netflix for big dollars. They would go to places like HBO or Showtime, Cinemax, Encore, Stars. They would go to regular broadcast channels some years down the road. And don't forget all the physical media sales that these things used to enjoy for months on end before they even hit those other broadcasters. All that is gone now, for the most part, with the exception of maybe some physical media sales, because Disney's not licensing Thor Love and Thunder out anymore to third parties that would pay them maybe $100 or $200 million over the course of time to broadcast these films once they hit television. They're going on to Disney Plus, where they make no money. And just as a reminder, Disney Plus in the last fiscal quarter reported another loss, which is what they expect to do at least for the next 2 years. They don't expect to make a profit until into their fiscal year 2025. So that's still a long way off. In fact, the losses on Disney Plus last quarter were $900 million, 3 times higher than they were in the same quarter 1 year earlier. Now, we've got Disney's stock report coming up on August 10th. Might try to do a live stream for that one as well, so stay tuned to this channel. But this movie, this Thor Love and Thunder movie, is just not looking like it's going to go very far. I think almost 99.9%. The $1 billion threshold that I'm sure Disney was hoping for, like they were with Doctor Strange, is completely off the table at this point. If this movie had opened up more like Doctor Strange at around 485 million worldwide, I would have thought it had a good chance to get there. But when the estimates started coming in at 300 or 350 and then 325 and then now 300, and now it might not even break 300, this movie's done, folks, from that standpoint. I think if it gets to $750 million from where it is right now would be very, very good. I just don't know what the chances are right now, because as we've seen, these enormous drop-offs in the second weekend. And of course, theater chains are very cognizant of this as well. And this is why the old school power of Disney to get these upfront bumps, on first or second weekends, they ain't going to be around anymore, folks, and they're probably not around right now. I've seen a lot of things where a lot of that dynamic has changed since the theaters have opened back up post-pandemic. So this is why I stick with the 55% flat at this point, because there's no incentive for theaters to give these films any kind of extra juice in the first weekend when they continuously crash to the tune of 65 and 70%. Going into weekend 2. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Want to hear from everybody out there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Smash that like button. Share this sucker out on social medias. Drop a comment, like I said, before you head out. And make sure you're subscribed. And until next time, folks, take care.